Hey, Roger here, and we're going there. We're going to do it. We're talking about a controversial topic. Brace yourself. We're talking about tithing. That means giving God the first 10% of your income. So what does the Bible say about tithing for the new covenant believer, the believer whose faith is in Jesus on this side of the cross? That's what we're going to talk about. Now, if this is your first time here, you might just want to subscribe down below and then pound that notification bell. That way you won't miss anything. So just go ahead and get your coffee, your hot tea, or your big gulp. Pull up your seat. We're going to make this short, but we're going there starting right now. So the short answer is this. The believer in Jesus on this side of the cross in the new covenant is not obligated to tithe. No. Now, I know people are screaming at me right now. Here's the point. The fact is, tithing was a part of the Jewish law. Okay? We're not under the old covenant, we're under the Jewish law. The people say to me, but Roger, tithing was done before the law, therefore it supersedes the law as a principle for all time. And they cite the book of Hebrews for that. Excuse me. Because Hebrews does say that Abraham tithed to Melchizedek. Melchizedek was a high priest who kind of came out of nowhere, came out of the blue, and Abraham tithed to him, and that was before Moses, before the law. So the argument is, see, that's a principle for all time. So my answer to that is, are you sure you want to say that if somebody did something in response to a requirement of God before the law, that, a commandment of God before the law, that is now a principle for all time? You're sure you want to say that? Because we got a little problem. For instance, one example would be that Abel, one of Adam and Eve's sons, offered a sacrifice, an animal sacrifice to God that God did require and that was acceptable to God. Now, Cain's sacrifice didn't work out so well. It was kind of a fruit and veggie sacrifice, and that didn't go real well. But Abel's did. So are we going to say that animal sacrifices are now a part of what we should be doing? Because that was before the law too. See? So the fact of the matter is, tithing is interwoven with the law, even though there was one example of Abraham doing that before the law. Now, I know when you get to Malachi chapter 3, people say, now if you don't tithe, you're robbing God. Well, people in Malachi were under the law, and that was a big deal then. They should have been doing that, and they weren't, and they got in trouble for that. Well, then people say to me, well, now Jesus mentioned tithing. Well, yeah, he mentioned it, but he didn't require it. He told the Pharisees that, yeah, you guys are real good at tithing mint and rue. That means they were tithing out of their herbal gardens. They were so good at tithing. And Jesus said you should have, along with tithing, you should have done the things that were more important, like mercy and the love of God. But no, you neglected that, but you're real good on tithing. So Jesus kind of minimizes tithing, and there again, he never required it. So then when you get to the New Testament writers, there is no New Testament writer, not Paul, not John, not Peter, nobody who required or told or even encouraged any believer to tithe. Just not there. And people say to me again, well, now Hebrews talks about, Abraham tithed to Melchizedek. Look, first of all, that was not about tithing. There's no conclusion to that where the writer of Hebrews says, now, just like Abraham, you need to make sure you're tithing. That was an illustration that Jesus was a high priest like Melchizedek. Melchizedek kind of came out of the blue. He was not a part of the Levitical system. He was not a part of the Old Covenant. He was just there, and Abraham acknowledged that he was a high priest of a great order and that he deserved to get his tithe. But the point is that Jesus is kind of like that. He was a high priest who is not a part of the Levitical system, who supersedes and is above the Levitical system. But it was not a discussion about tithing per se. Just wasn't. So, fact is that believers are free. Now, when you get to 2 Corinthians, Paul does talk about giving. And he says there's two important things about giving. And he does say that you can reap by giving, which is pretty amazing. You can reap a harvest by what you give. Totally agree with that. But he says two things about giving. Number one, do not do it under compulsion. If somebody pressures you to give, don't give. Look, if I ever come on here and you hear me in some YouTube podcast and I'm or video saying, hey, I need your help because our ministry is going under and you need to send whatever amount of money today, don't do it. First of all, I'm never going to do that. And if you do send me money, I'll tell you right now, I don't know what I'm going to do with it. I may give it away or I may spend it. I don't know. Don't send me any money. If you got some money, some extra money, take your wife or husband or somebody out for dinner. I mean, don't send it to me. But now, second thing he said, don't give under compulsion, but give cheerfully. If you can't be happy about it, don't do it. Don't be a grumpy giver. Those are the two things that Paul said about giving in 2 Corinthians. But never does he say, make sure that you do that 10% thing, Christians are free. They're not under the law. Now, if you want your mind blown, here's what you do. I'm going to show you scripture I bet you've never seen before, and I guarantee you your church has never, ever mentioned this scripture. It's in Deuteronomy chapter 14, and it starts about verse 22 through about verse 26, something like that, where God talks about the fact that yearly they can take a tenth of their tithe, a tenth of their crops and all that, and they basically would have a feast with it. They could eat their own tithe. And then he says, you do that in a designated place. And then this is mind-blowing. I mean, I don't even know for sure what to do with this. But then it says in Deuteronomy, if you can't get to the specified place to do this, where the Lord shows you, if you can't get there, it's too hard for you to get there, then just turn it into money, sell the 10% of your stuff, whatever you're going to take for this, and then just spend it on whatever your heart desires. Food, he says, drink. I mean, just have you and your family can have their own personal party. Now, that was even under the law. Think about that. So, anyway, but the final point is that as a Christian, we are not under obligation to give. You can still tithe. You can give 10%. You can give 20%. You can give whatever you want. And you can give it to whomever you want. That's just the way it is. As believers in Jesus, we are free. So I say again, well, how about that?